Every technology is fundamentally a bridge to the next technology. In the radio chapter that we study, we will focus primarily on this theme where the precursor to radio wave technology and the AM FM radio is Morse code, in addition to the phonograph, which is stated or shown here and was created by Thomas Edison, which then eventually led to his invention of the light bulb. So every technology is indeed fundamentally responsible for the next one. So as we think about radio and the role that it plays today in our lives, it's kind of difficult because we oftentimes will refuse to use the AM FM radio for information or entertainment these days. What we typically will relate more to is the use of Wi-Fi technology, which indeed is a short form radio wave technology that we're using. So the precursor is the telegraph and Samuel Morse is ideally the first thing that comes about when we think about the electronic age of mass communication. Instant point-to-point communication revolutionizes the world. It changes wars, and it allows the old to communicate with the new in a very instant way using Morse code. Now, the early radio wave technology was created by the father of radio known as Guglielmo Marconi, and his radio allowed for long distance wireless communication. But after the development of the telegraph wire, people wanted to find ways to connect with one another outside of the wire. So, in an effort to expand this technology and bridge the new, we had to figure out a way to do that. And so Guglielmo Marconi is responsible for that particular development, in addition to Nikola Tesla, who is the forgotten inventor of wireless telegraph. So Nikola Tesla was also working on his own wireless system at the same time that Marconi was. They were competitors with one another. And Nikola Tesla actually invented his wireless system in 1892, and later on, through several court cases and patent reviews, he was declared the inventor of the radio in 1943 by the US Supreme Court. Now, if you're interested in learning more about Nikola Tesla, I encourage you to look him up. There are several documentaries that are much more reliable than what you might see today on Netflix. But if you go to pbs.org, you can find some good information about him there and his contribution to the electronic age. Fast forwarding into the next technology, we have the liquid barrier, which was a first audio device that permitted voice to go through a wireless signal. And this was something that AT&T early on capitalized on the technology that was developed by Reginald Fessenden, a Canadian scientist. So the theme obviously is technology bridges us into the next, and it is a precursor to the next technology that allows us to communicate the way we do today. Another example of that is the audion tube, which is a vacuum tube that amplifies wireless signal, and it allows for much more clear transmission of voices and music. It launches the telephone business and also the sound recording industry, which we see and know of today. And that was in 1903, invented by Lee DeForest. So now that there's clear ways to communicate point to point, radio wave technology was allowing us to communicate in a very interpersonal way. And now we are able to harness, however, the mass communication airwaves. So it becomes a mass communication tool rather than just a point to point interpersonal communication tool. And because of that, many amateurs began to gather their equipment and figure out a way to disrupt the radio waves. And so the spectrum, the radio wave spectrum, obviously, if we consider FM radio, starts at 88.1 and ends at 107.9. This is what we call spectrum scarcity, where it's a finite system, it's a finite space. So meaning it's not infinite. So any dial that you go to has a particular radio wave frequency. And when you have several people trying to join in on this particular frequency, it can jam the airwaves. So this is what leads to the coming of regulation in the radio. The federal government has to step in and they have to find ways to help corporations come together and coordinate their efforts so that way the radio waves can be used in an efficient way and not clog the system. So, who are using radio wave technology at the start of the 1900s? There were many businesses like telephone companies. You also had wireless telegraph companies using the frequencies. In addition to that, you had other companies like shipping companies that were using their point-to-point radio wave technology to communicate to the ports and when they were going to arrive with packages and shipments of fruit and other products that were being shipped from overseas. So the federal government steps in and allows the corporations to come together. Westinghouse is a big energy company, also in the train industry as well. And so, in the industrial age, these are the big players who came together to fundamentally create a basis for broadcasting, and it created what we now know as RCA, the Recording Corporation of America, and that is the first radio network, national network. And it is a broadcaster and it's privately owned, but they are operating on what we know as the public airwaves. So it's commercially owned enterprises. It's not the government that actually owns RCA. It is these companies you see here that were in working together to create a whole new network. So they put a lot of money behind this. What also happened when this was created was radio then became not just a function for work, for point-to-point communication, but it became a very commercialized medium because it allowed for advertisers to form, their own commercials and make commercials for radio and to support the Radio Corporation of America. So it gave advertisers some control to some degree. It allowed for them to begin to fund some of the radio stations that were being formed around the country that were the affiliates to RCA. So RCA creates that first nationwide American radio company, and it's renaming this radio network that they own as the National Broadcasting Company, which is what we now know as NBC, or if you're a streamer, you may stream Peacock if you have that application. So this is what is the birth of broadcasting. So NBC, before Peacock, it builds the red and blue network. The RCA company creates two networks to provide telephone and radio services. They have a red network, which is their telephone group, and it's known as NBC Red. And then they create the radio group, which is known as NBC Blue. Now, as you can see here, there's a domination. There's a dominant effect happening. There's a monopoly happening in the radio industry because their only other competitor really is an up and coming, what we know as Columbia Broadcasting Service, CBS. So Columbia Broadcasting is the only competitor to NBC. And so as NBC begins to build its affiliates in all of these cities, meaning you have to create radio towers and stations for all of these to connect to the NBC overall national affiliate in New York, was created a sort of a monopoly. So here comes more regulations from the federal government saying, we're going to have to break you all up. And so what ends up happening is they create a separate network, which is known as ABC. So you end up with NBC, ABC, and CBS, which are still in existence today. If you go to regular TV and watch it, you'll notice those. Now, what else allows for radios to develop their growth? Well, obviously, the automobile industry is thriving. In the 1930s and 40s, you begin to see this arrival of the personal vehicle, and also the common installation of FM radios in cars, which is obviously leading to more growth of the public radio networks across the country. In the 1930s, there's the golden age of radio, and the reason they call it this is because of the massive growth that this medium begins to see in terms of audience groups. So the number of homes with radios grows from 12 million to 30 million in within a decade. Now that's significant growth and allows for more audience members to engage, therefore increases the revenue for these networks because advertisers love when audiences can grow on a network. So early radio programming dominates everyone's routine after school or on the weekends. We didn't have television, affordable television at this moment in time, so people would gravitate to their radio and they would listen to, quiz shows, dramatic programs, those and the likes of that, and also music, which is becoming a huge deal. Now, Franklin D. Roosevelt also uses this medium for what he considers the fireside chats, and usually these would happen on Saturday nights, and he would give updates about the Great Depression and also the World War that is going on in the 1940s. You also have the programming of soap operas, which get their name from a common advertisement that would usually sponsor these radio shows, and they were usually sponsors for soap. Whoever is making like Ivory soap, or today you have different kinds of soap products and different brands. So typically they would advertise during these kinds of programs, and that's how these dramatic shows coined the name soap operas, and eventually went to television, and then eventually is kind of dying out now. What you also see is the rise of Billboard Top 40 formats in radio, and this is currently what we still see as a pattern in our radio stations on the FM dial. So this is also important to consider because when you are growing in your platform, you begin to attract all kinds of different talents. And in this case, it was the music industry. Now, radio ownership goes from a diverse group of companies to becoming more deregulated, meaning in the Telecommunications Act of 1996, so we're fast forwarding to the 90s here. This act allows for programs on various stations being more automated and less individualized. It eliminates most ownership restrictions in radio, meaning if you were a company that owned telephone wires at this stage of the game, you couldn't necessarily own radio stations, or there was maybe a restriction on how many radio stations you could own. Now, the Telecommunications Act got rid of a lot of those ownership rules and created more of a concentration of ownership. An example of that would be iHeartMedia, that owns several hundred radio stations across the United States in different cities. Now, obviously, the audience groups that we see over the generations has migrated to digital spaces and digital radio stations, if you will, web radio, streaming services, and podcasting. So where we see the radio networks moving is broadcasting on their website, or trying to gravitate to different spaces that younger people are obviously going to. And so that's why you have like iHeartRadio apps and things of that nature. So we're obviously changing with the times and how we access our music, how we access even talk shows or newscasts or podcasts for that matter, is definitely migrating to an online space. So every technology is fundamentally a bridge to the next one. There's always a precursor to where we are today. So in today's world, we obviously take for granted the wireless technology that we have, i.e., the Wi-Fi signal that might be at your nearest, um, you know, Starbucks, or whether you're at home and you're on the home Wi-Fi. All of that technology would not be possible without the wireless telegraph, without the phonograph, without electricity. So just keep in mind that whatever you're streaming today or whatever you're accessing via digital channel had to have some kind of precursor, because every technology is fundamentally a bridge to the next one. Thanks for your time.